Flip our board over so we're not getting the fennel where the meat was. This is a large bulb of fennel. Fennel's like a celery texture. Nice and juicy, but it has a licorice flavor. My kids used to call it licorice celery. We always referred to it when I was a kid as fenugreek. You can actually save this and chop it up and saute it with a little garlic and oil and put it over some pasta. So we'll just keep that aside for later. Always cut the end off. They get a little bit dark in color, but you can see once you trim it, it's nice and white. This is really a beautiful piece of fennel. I'm going to cut this in half. I'm going to start to put a little heat under my saute pan. And each of these halves, I'm going to actually cut them in threes. Actually, this is so big, I think I can get a fourth out of it. Yeah, that'll work out nice. What we're going to do is we're going to braise this more or less. We could roast it in the oven. Either way, it's going to turn out to be a braise because we're going to do a little bit of liquid. But I call it roasting when we're doing it under a fairly high heat, because what's going to happen is the liquid from the fennel that comes out and the other liquid we're going to add, which is a little bit of stock in this case, it's going to kind of dry up and we're going to have a wonderful kind of caramelization in the pan. Again, we're going to start with some regular olive oil. Start to arrange these pieces nicely in here. Just getting the oil all over this pan. Trying to fit this all in here so that we have nice solid pan. I love when the spring comes out. We get nice fresh herbs. I've got some wonderful chives. They start to emerge. Some nice little baby arugula that we're going to use for our salad. We want to salt and pepper this fennel. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to lower the heat down and put the lid on a little bit. There was a gentleman who used to have a show some years back. I think his name was Pasquale. He had a very heavy Italian accent. And as I'm telling stories and talking so I don't lose track of time, I'm going to start to do something else actually. I'm going to put a little heat under my pressure cooker, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, and get my risotto going. A little bit more olive oil. We need some onions. So anyway, Pasquale had this show, and he would always saute things, and then he would put a lid on it, and he would always say, "Now I'm going to steam a saute." And really what that does is it allows you to cook under a fairly high heat. Once you start to develop a little bit of caramelization on what you're cooking, it also steams through and it helps to cook it through. We want these pieces of fennel to be nice and soft, and that caramelization will just bring a lot of sweetness to the exterior. We're going to just slice this up. Just a coarse chop. Actually, I'm using a tiny knife when I should be using a large one. After I slice my onion this way, then, see, the onion's round in two ways. I'll start to make slices, and I'll spin it around. And that kind of squares it off a little bit so that when I get to the last cut, it doesn't break apart, which often happens when you're doing things like onions that are layered and have a round side that if you cut and you don't make a nice cut the first time you're pressing on it, it just kind of falls apart. So we'll put our onion in our pressure cooker. So remember, we are steam a saute here, and we're nice and slow cook here. I'm always looking at ways to save a couple of minutes. We cooked shallot and a little garlic and parsley, and certainly that won't have any ill effect on our risotto. So I'm just using the same spoon instead of washing another spoon, because you always want to make sure that you have some economics of mobility when you're in the kitchen. Try not to make too big of a mess, because if you're accustomed to doing it and cleaning up, the fewer things that you use, the shorter period of time you have for the cleanup. If you do a little cleanup as you go along, it always works real well and just helps you get done nice and quick. Let that onion saute a minute. Let's take a look at our fennel. I want to give these a turn. Starting to brown a little bit on the edges. A few pieces falling apart, but not a problem. Raise that flame up just a little bit more. Now we start keeping track of 14 things at one time. Lower the heat down just a bit. I have some porcini mushrooms that I have been reconstituting. You can see they're in some liquid. I just want to squeeze them out a little bit. And we'll reserve that liquid also, because we can use that as some of our cooking liquid with the risotto. Just want to give them a quick, coarse chop. That's good. I think we lost a little piece here. We'll get him right back in. Another stir on our onion here. This is a quick method for making risotto. Normally risotto, you stand and stir for 50 minutes. After we get all these flavoring components in, we're going to add our arborio rice. Arborio rice is a wonderful short grain rice that is very starchy, and the outside starts to melt away when you're cooking. So we toast that around a little bit. And up until this point, whether I'm doing it in a pressure cooker or doing it conventionally, it's really the same process. You want to toast the rice around. It's when we get to the next stage that the pressure cooker changes it dramatically. For traditional risotto cooking, you would have a big pot of warm stock, and once we add our little bit of wine to this, you would start adding stock maybe a half a cup at a time and stirring it until it's all absorbed. And then you would do that and continue to stir and add stock for about 50 minutes until you achieve the right consistency for the rice. No exact measurement on the stock. And again, you're standing here basically for 50 minutes. So this way with the pressure cooker, now that I've got it to this point, I'm going to add a little bit of wine. And for a single recipe, you need 1/4 cup. So I'd say that's about 1/4. We just stir that around until most of that is absorbed. But here's the big difference. We're going to add our stock. And we're going to add a combination of that mushroom liquor that I was talking about, the liquid that we've reconstituted, those dried porcini mushrooms, which are actually from Italy. So here's some of that rich mushroom liquor. And we're going to put a little bit of chicken stock in as well. You could use vegetable stock and keep it vegetarian. So we need 2 cups. Here's the big bonus with the pressure cooker. We put all the stock in. We give that a stir, and we're going to just bring that up to a simmer. I need to take a look at 2 things now. I need to take a look at my fennel.